Representative Israel.
Madam Chair, we didn't ask if we had questions of Mr. Shelley. Can I ask him a question? Mr. Shelley, there was an item in the news. You mentioned her name, and I think her name deserves to be mentioned, and her case deserves to be highlighted at this hearing, because we're dealing with a bill that has a lot of penalties in it and punitive things. But would you elaborate more on the case of Crystal Mason, who is now in jail?
Would you state your name again and position on the issue for the people at home?
Yes, Madam Chair. Representative, thank you. Adrian Shelley, again with Public Citizen, still testifying in opposition to the bill. So you're referring to the case of Crystal Mason. She was imprisoned, I believe, for tax fraud. She served her term. She was out on release. She was not off paper. She was under the mistaken impression that she would be able to vote. She cast a ballot. She ended up being convicted of voter fraud and is serving 5 years. And, I think that case and the case of Rosa Ortega are illustrative of the actual effect that this sort of effort is having in our state. We don't know that we're curtailing widespread voter fraud. We do know that we have overcriminalized in a couple of very unfortunate cases.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other? Chairman Anchia.
Yeah. Thank you. And to the gentleman at the end, I apologize for not remembering your name.
I'm Joe Reynolds.
Mr. Reynolds, thank you for being here and testifying today. I've been doing elected public service for about 20 years, and before that did volunteer on campaigns. So we have a long track record of experience in all things elections. It's my feeling that when the state consistently changes the rules, whether it be for photo ID or widespread changes like this, that it takes, and this is really a meta question, that it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 elections for that to be socialized among election workers across this very, very big state. It takes repeated training. It takes a lot of attention. It takes a pretty in-depth knowledge of the elections code for it to really sink in to the infrastructure that makes our elections go. And I have found, and I want your reaction to this, I've found that more often than not, what people think is fraud is actually human error and mistake. And that is not to say that we shouldn't change the election law, but when we engage in widespread changes, the implementation of that takes a long time. People are still, in the district that I represent, getting it wrong on what is required and not required on photo ID, right? And still sending people away because they believe they are ineligible to vote because they don't have the right kind of ID, despite court cases to the contrary. What are your views on this generally? And again, real top level, if you don't mind.
Okay, let's think this. I've seen some material from California, and I've got, of course, the 20 years experience here in Texas. In some cases, the training that we get is very trivial, how to set up the booths. But in other cases, you're dealing with a trainer when you're doing that. You're not dealing with the voter, and that makes a whole difference when you're trying to get things across. And voters are precious; they need to be protected. So you have to work through that stuff. But yeah, it does take a long time, and sometimes mistakes get made anyway. Here in Travis County, the machines that we have, every voter goes and gets a random code that they can then go to a booth and vote. But that has to have the right code on it or they don't get the right ballot. Okay? And even though we're all trained and we all work on that stuff, I put a monitor there to make sure that whoever's passing that out, and the voter's going to sign that says this is the right ballot type. But we still find when my guys are helping, oversee that, 2 to 3% mistakes, and it's just because people are people, And no, that guy's, he doesn't, whoever's running that booth may not know who's there at all. It's not like they're trying to get at somebody. They just, they screwed up.
Yeah, yeah. And this question is for Mr. Vera. I really liked your testimony, Mr. Vera. I had a similar experience as you in my first election, where we had optical scanner, but the printing on the scanning did not line up with the optical reader, and we had a couple hundred votes that were not tallied until there was and only because there was a recount trigger did we discover that the printing on the ballot was not lining up with the scanning, and that allowed, I don't know, a couple hundred votes to count that would not otherwise have counted. So I share your concerns about optical scanners at times, and the error rate is not insignificant. Yeah,
we would agree, and we have yet to do a recount for the mail ballots where there weren't that level of changes in votes, because the scanner could not decipher what the voter wanted. So we had to go into human interpretation of what was the voter's intent.
right. Thank you.